So without further ado, let me hand you over to Nigel Smith. Nigel.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for stealing a little bit of the thunder with the intros. I want to try and keep this section a little bit conversational through the next 60, 70, 80 minutes or so. I'll keep it going as long as I need to, because we've got a very small group. My aim is to make it very conversational, but of course you can also use the chat as well. And just wanting to move on to the agenda for today, the sort of things we're going to cover. I'm actually going to plan a little bit of a virtual warm-up next. One of the elements of that was the self-introductions, but we can pass that by, but there is another little bit we can do. Then I'll give a little bit of background to myself and why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I'll introduce you to the Rainbows model, which I came up with back in March when pandemic first hit, when I felt that resilience was an incredibly important subject. And what I've realised is it's still as relevant right now as it was way back then. And I think, as Keith mentioned too already, not just with sales professionals, but with any business professional, resilience is actually important at any time, and equally is as important in prosperous times as well as challenging times, because when you're ahead of the curve, you need strategies, tools and techniques to stay there. So we'll look at what that model is. I'll talk about the benefits of the model itself and what it can offer. And this is not a prescription, a silver bullet to solve everybody's ills. It's not a panacea. It's just stuff that you might want to try. It might be stuff that you're already doing. And I would encourage you, when we get to some conversational parts, just to share what you're doing with everybody else, because fundamentally from these sessions, I've learned that you can just as well learn from each other as you can from me on these sessions. So I know it's a bit limited, but there's an element of network here as well. And as we get towards the end, we can take on some reflective practice, and what that might be is what maybe you're going to do differently, or what action you're looking to take from this. Then finally on there, I've got questions, but what I would say is, because we're only a very small group, if you've got questions, just throw them in as we go along. Does that all sound okay to everybody? Great, thank you. So, virtual warm-up then. Now, I see that everybody's sitting comfortably. I trust, John, that David can hear me across the ether. Okay, excellent. What I'd like you to do, if you're seated and sitting comfortably, and you might want to close your eyes for this small portion, I just want to do something that's used by the US Navy SEALs and also the yoga teacher in my village. And it's something we do thousands of times every day, but fundamentally we don't always do it that well. And it is, of course, called breathing. So what I'd like you to do is just to sit back in your chair, relax. If you want to, just place your hands on your stomach, okay? Just by your belly button. Just relax, close your eyes if you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called the 4x4x4 technique. And what that means is we're going to breathe in to the count of 4. We're going to hold our breath for the count of 4. And then we're going to exhale to the count of 4. So let's start. So breathe in up through the nose and feel that rush of air fill your lungs, okay? Notice your diaphragm has risen. Hold the breath there for another count, 2, 3, 4, and then slowly exhale through the mouth and notice that rush of air go through. And then when you exhale, notice how you automatically breathe back in through the nose to the count of 4. And feel the hand on your stomach being pushed out as your lungs get full of air. Just notice your hands and your feet and how you're feeling and sitting in your chair. And then just allow, exhale through the mouth again to the count of 4. And then for the final time, up, in and through the nose. Big, deep breath. Feel that diaphragm rise. Hold that breath there for another count of 3, 2, 3. And then finally, just breathe out through the mouth. Okay. If you're still with me, you can open your eyes and you're back in the room. Okay, so I know it's a little bit unusual. If someone had said to me last year or even the year before, doing this sort of mindful technique, I probably would have dismissed it out of quarter. But actually, I find it quite nice and good technique to help relax. So, how does everybody feel right now? Good, excellent. Okay, so this was the bit that I was going to cover before. So the who, the what, and the why. So we've covered a little bit of that in the introductions already. I still have a job on to tell you about who I am and what I do. So my name is Nigel Smith. I live in a place called Bromsgrove, just southwest Birmingham. I've been in the Midlands area for virtually all of my life. My formative years were spent in the automotive industry down at Rover at Longbridge, where I also spent a lot of time at the Ford Motor Company, General Motors, just before the last financial crash of 2008, when I moved into the wonderful world of IT and systems, working with John. We had a few good projects out in the Middle East and things like that. And I expanded my knowledge across many industry areas outside of automotive and manufacturing, into healthcare, into fashion, into retail, into distribution, all in the project management field. And a lot like all of you guys, you get a wealth of knowledge and experience doing all of those things. And so just moving on to resilience, I always think it's quite useful to come up with a definition of what resilience is. But does anyone have any thoughts on what they think resilience might mean to them?
I think, if I may, I think for me it's the ability to withstand relentless pressure or stress.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is true. And the way I've described it, and this is not a dictionary definition, by the way, Keith, it's one I've sort of come back to. I think at the core of resilience, I sort of call it, although it's not in there, it's about bounce back ability, really. It's about coming back to your standard improved self from whatever position of stress or constraint you're within. And so for me, it's the capacity to navigate adversity and meet challenges within a positive mental attitude. And I'll come on to some of the tools and techniques that can help you do that. But also to spring back to an improved version of yourself. And at the same time, taking that good care of yourself and everyone else around you at the same time. So that's how I define it. I would like to first of all just take us back to March this year, which, if anyone had said to me on January the 1st, we would have entered by the end of March a situation where you weren't allowed to pretty much go out of your house or drive down the road, it would have been fairly unbelievable, to be honest. And for me, COVID was pretty much a black swan event. And I don't know if anyone's come across the term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Okay, so you put all of those things in. I think it was a term used in the military from the 60s, but for me, it became the most VUCA month of my life in that regard, with lots of things going on. It was almost as if you went down to the local library, or perhaps read about this incident in 50 years from now, that, you know, science fiction and fantasy became current affairs. Really, it was quite unbelievable. And I don't know about you back in the early days, but certainly shopping at supermarkets was a little bit problematic. It may still be at the moment. And my local supermarket down in Bromsgrove resembled more like a crime scene, with all the yellow tape and markings and hand washing sanitizers and everything. So really, really hard, and people in face masks. It was really difficult and different. And of course, everyone's talked about the new normal over the last 6 months. And of course, there will be a normal, but it won't be the normal that we've come from. You know, change is always very constant. And the sort of metaphor I'd like to put over the top of this, it's a little bit like a frog can't become a tadpole, or a butterfly can't become a chrysalis. The change is one way and it's permanent. It comes out to be something very different. And fundamentally, I believe whatever is at the other side of what we're going through right now can be prosperous and will be prosperous, but it's all a question of your own personal mindset. And I'm always reminded here when I talk about threat or opportunity in terms of, if you remember, what Charles Darwin once said, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent that survive. It's those that are most adaptable to change. And we've seen, haven't we, over the last few months, those people that are really making a difference are those that are diversifying away from what they did before. They're recognizing the old way of doing things is not going to be the current way forward. Now, we see that around us in terms of what happens with people working from home, working remotely. And whilst that might have been a honeymoon scenario in the first month or two, I'm sure some of the constraints about, your office is your bedroom or your kitchen or your living room or your conservatory, you start to see some of the shortcomings of that. But again, threats or opportunity. But equally, there are positives about the time we're in at the moment. So just wanted you to reflect for one moment to think about maybe what's one thing that you will actually miss about lockdown itself? Is there anything? I mean, yes, John?
It's the time, really. I find that I've suddenly got time to do things that before was pretty much impossible, because you're always rushing around in the middle of everything. Yeah. Always one little firefight to the next or whatever. And now, if you can schedule your day properly, there's the ability to actually do all the extra things you couldn't do before.
Yeah, and is that because of the commute, John, or you just or the things?
Just work. Well? I mean, just work. It's always busy, doing things all the time, and now time to sort of do other things like this little. I'm doing a little exercise with David in Nairobi, which I would never have had time to do before, and it's given me the chance to do opportunities. Trying to do things that you could think of before, but you can never actually do.
Yeah. How about yourself, Graham?
I mean, the positive I've seen from lockdown is the fact that you can spend more time or more quality time with your family, and the kind of work-life balance is a bit easier. I'm not sure what will happen when we go back to normal, or any kind of sense of normality. What will change on that? I think it's just, as you said, it's about trying to look at things and find the positive for them.
Yeah, and of course we'll come on to my model in a moment, and one of those is about what we do. And I guess I would find it, I mean, I went on to sort of home working, remote working, virtual working, call it whatever you will, 12, 15 years ago. And it was a big struggle for me, because I'd gone from pretty much spending 5 days a week in an office environment, and I'd gone from that to absolutely working at home. One of the big problems I had was the isolation part, which is what a lot of people felt during the early part of lockdown. And fortunately, I've been through that. And if I was to say that the sort of, the work from home thing didn't really impact me at all through this current phase here, but I can imagine how it can for a lot of people. But I can't think about going back to a 9-to-5 job in a normal office environment. I'm sure the same is true for many people now we've been through the habit of the last few months. So I'm just going to put a statement on the screen here. It's all to do with threats or opportunity. You may have seen it before. If you have, just keep it quiet to yourself for a moment. I just want to see what others might think of it. But fundamentally, what is it that people see or read here? Anybody?
Opportunity is now.
Opportunity is now, yeah. Or opportunity is now here. Can anybody read anything else from that at all?
Opportunity is nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely right. So this is your classic glass half full, glass half empty statement. And it is a mindset thing, because most people, well, not most people, but some people do read it first as opportunity is nowhere. Sometimes I get people saying, well, snow's here and stuff like that. But it's not a trick thing. But sometimes, as I'll come on to talk to you about later, sometimes thoughts become feelings, and when you think negative, you feel negative and you act negative. But equally, when you think positive, you can act positive and feel positive. And it's a really powerful cocktail of things that keeps us motivated. And again, I'd just like to introduce at this point, for those of you that haven't seen it before, the Kubler-Ross change cycle. It might also have been referred to as the grief cycle. At all points in life where we suffer significant setback or loss, would tend to go through this curve. And you might have seen it also just even in business change in the organizations in which you work in. You know, very often something comes along and the first thing you think about is, well, denial, you know, this thing is not happening, and therefore you just revert to type, think things are going to be okay, and your morale sort of goes up a little bit. But fundamentally, as time goes by and the change is more permanent, there is this element of frustration, anger, and if we're not careful, depression, as we slide insidiously, you know, towards a much lower morale point. This is all very natural, by the way, and I can say that in March I went up and down this several times, and what I tried to do was actually build a bridge between frustration and acceptance. And that's where I'm hoping will be of value to you today. You know, I think it's absolutely fine, if you excuse the French, to be a bit racked off with a situation, to be quite angry about things. But there is a time limit on that, and you should probably limit it, you know, to probably a few minutes or so, because fundamentally, as we'll come on to, it's about controlling what you can control at the end of the day. If you're in control of yourself, you can be a little bit more in a peace with yourself. So what I want to try and do is get you guys to avoid the depressive and the angry stages and become more curious and to be more action orientated. Because, you know, we'll come on to another couple of things later, that the only two things we can really control are our thoughts and our actions, and actions are the only things that bring us to change fundamentally. So is that something that somebody's seen before? Do they recognize it? You know, where do you think you are on it now? You know, is there anything anybody wants to share?
I think I'm a bit like at the curiosity stage, really, to find out what's going to happen next, because it's been a while now, it's been several months.
Yeah.
And now it's really, in my mind, is now thinking what's going to happen next. Let's start to investigate.
And I think that was true from what you said earlier as well, John. You talked about your potential partnership with David and those sort of opportunities open up. You're starting to look at things differently to the way you possibly would have done before, which is pretty good. How about yourself, Sue? Where do you find yourself on there?
I've definitely done the first half of the curve once or twice in the last few months. I can admit to that. I'm probably more at the curiosity, acceptance, well, definitely acceptance. Probably a little bit of focus going forward now. Certainly work-wise, personal-wise, there's somewhere in the mess in the middle, I think, if the truth be known. But yeah, I can definitely recognise all of those many times over.
And I think, to be honest, you can build a bridge between any of the points on here. So sometimes you can go from shock straight to action. You know, you don't have to go through all of this, but it's just nice to know if you find yourself in a certain position, it's ultimately natural. You know, this is often called the bereavement curve as well. So when you lose somebody close, you tend to go through this very same cycle as well. How about yourself, Keith? Do you recognise where you might be or have been on this during the COVID journey?
Well, actually, you know, when I look at the conditions that we've been undertaken the last sort of 6 months, I might have actually been living my life like that for the last 2 years anyway. I always washed my hands after I shook hands with someone, because as you know, from you met me face to face in Birmingham that time. But I think I got to acceptance quite quickly, and it's been a breath of fresh air, if that's the correct expression. I've been able to have lunch with my wife every day. You know, we have a different enhanced level of communication. It's been, you know, I know there's a lot of anguish out in the general society, but it's been positive for me. My curiosity with John on that is that how do we embrace the goodness that this has brought about in terms of air pollution? One fact, John, I'm not sure whereabouts you are, but in the West Midlands, I was on a thing with the public health director, Justin Varney, recently, and they said that as many people in Birmingham have died through air pollution issues or complications from air pollution as have died through COVID since March 23rd. I was unaware of that as a statistic, but so I'm really hoping the Curiosity side that we can embrace some of those benefits and you know, just get some semblance of life back.
I think as well, thanks for that, Keith, and it touched on some of the work-life balances I think Graham mentioned a little earlier. But I think we've also seen an explosion in creativity as well, haven't we? With, you know, certain manufacturers diversifying and making parts, like Formula One teams making ventilators, and, you know, companies like Barber making sort of PPE for hospitals and stuff. So a lot of people, it almost feels like a bit like a war effort at times, where it sort of pulls peoples together. And of course, COVID is a equal opportunities disease, isn't it? In that sense, it's a bit of a leveler, which puts everybody on the same page. And I think, you know, most people judge fairness by equality. And I think when people are impacted and at the same risk as everybody else, it tends to bring people together a lot closer. So that's been a really good thing, and a really positive thing out of all of that. But that was really just to position, you know, however you feel is completely natural at any point in time. But it's good to know that many of us are actually on the way up and out of the depressive part, which is good news. So now I just then want to introduce my rainbows model to you. And the only reason I came up with rainbows as an acronym, because of course it was very prevalent, a little bit less so now because of what's going on, but everyone was drawing rainbows on their pavement in chalk, sticking little posters in their window for a really good cause. And then I had the task of trying to work out what I could get the R to stand for and the A and all the rest of it. And by the time I'd finished, I got about 3 W's and 2 O's, and it just didn't make sense at all. So I'm not teaching or sharing anything new with anybody today. Maybe what I'm doing is just raising your awareness of things that you may already know, perhaps have tried and don't work, but some do. And I'll share what doesn't work for myself as well. But fundamentally, it's a little bit of a refresher. And I just hope that I'm able to package it in a very neat way for you, so it's easy to understand. So first and foremost, on rainbows, the R stands for routine. And we've touched on this a little bit already when we talked about the last 6 months. You know, we've been forced into a new way of doing things. It makes it really hard to go back because habits can become ingrained. And habits are a little bit like cholesterol, really, in that if you go to your GP, your doctor will say, well, there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. And it's the same with habits, because if you get into a bad habit, it can take you into a vicious circle and take you spiraling down. But on the other side of the coin, if you get into good positive habits, it can really lift you up in a virtuous way and take you away from all of that. And my sort of definition around routines are just small repeated actions, stuff that you do on a regular basis that become, if you like, an automatic response for you. And when they're small and become habits and you make them positive, you can actually effect really great change. Now, so the more negative aspect of this is about, you know, for some people, you could have moved into a very insidious slide, you know, with the current situation back in March, where people drift into, you know, dressing down or even dressing down, you know, Netflix for breakfast, lunch and dinner, those type of things. You do that for a period, it becomes the norm. It's really difficult to get yourself back out of that. And of course, the force of habit is really strong. You know, in the early days, and probably still now, I know you've touched on it already, Keith, when you talked about cleaning your hands and all the rest of it. How often were we told not to touch our face or, you know, things like that? But it's such an automatic thing that we do. It's such a difficult thing to actually stop doing. And what I do is something that I call a daily prime. And I'll touch on some of these things as we go through the next hour or so. But my daily prime is made up of a gratitude diary. Okay, so whilst every day may not be great, I think there's always great in every day. And I just spend 10, 15 minutes each day, usually at the end of the day, just recording 3 things that I was grateful that happened, you know, or things that I was really pleased that happened. And some days it might just be because the sun came out, or my Wi-Fi didn't go down, or I watched a really great program, or a really great conversation, anything like that. And it's not a diary in a sense that I actually get a benefit from reading back on it. What it does for me every single day is give me 10 or 15 minutes where my mind is tuned in to looking for the good in something, even if I've had a very terrible day. And just as an example, back in April, BT, bless them, cocked up my broadband, and I was without broadband for most of April. So I actually had to use 4G off my mobile network for about 3 weeks at quite a high cost, but it was enough to get me through. And so I was very grateful, A, that I got the mobile connection, but even more grateful when the broadband came back online. Another thing I do is drink a lot of water, so 2.5 litres a day. I got one of these Fitbit things, these trackers, measures my sleep. I also try and measure my weight, and you'll see on there there's an X there, so I'm not particularly good at that right now. But I also try and take 10,000 steps a day as well, which is about 4.5 miles, something like that. And the final one on there is I try and read. So I've got books that I've got. Try and read for about 60 minutes a day, or do something for self-improvement. And that's proved to be really, really powerful. I know, John, we've spoken in the past, you do a lot of the LinkedIn courses at the moment, which you're getting quite a lot of benefit from. But has anybody got any things they do for their equivalent of a daily prime at all? Is there something else that you do, John? I know we talked about your exercise routine in the morning on occasions.
You know, I put together a schedule for the day, because I mean, in the past, I mean, I work from home a lot anyway, so I was able to always have a schedule, and I've always got a mindset for trying to some sort of routine. But LinkedIn Learning, as you mentioned, I mean, I've never really bothered, and it's opened a whole can of things to look at that I never thought about before. So I schedule that for an hour a day. Like you said, the walking, the exercise. I didn't have enough exercise before, so again, that's been positive. You know, one of the things you said before, what's good with COVID, not much more exercise.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just trying to keep a positive mindset, I think, really, more than anything.
Sure.
That's my daily prime.
Thank you. Anything, Graham, that you've done differently since the start of lockdown, which has been quite positive for you?
I mean, going back to the point that you raised about your kind of diary, I always try and think at the end of the day about 2 or 3 things that have been good about the day. And it doesn't necessarily need to be work related. It could be anything.
Absolutely.
It might be if the sun's been out. It might be if the birds are singing in the garden or whatever. It's just to kind of put it in perspective, because everything at the moment, if you look at the media or anything like that, it's all doom and gloom, and it's just to try and get out of that kind of feeling of being brought down by everything. I try and do some more exercise. I don't always do as much as I can, but I like doing stuff in the morning before I would start my work day, because I just think a little bit of exercise before you start kind of puts you in a slightly better place. So I'll do spin classes down the gym in the morning. I'll go out for a run at lunchtime if I can, or a cycle. But like I said, it doesn't happen all the time. But it's just trying to get some kind of sense of balance and normality, really.
Sorry, everybody, I had to take a call then, so my apologies.
No
This dog's just been under an operation, so she was just ringing to say it was okay. So, very important one.
Thank you.
I don't know, John, if David on LinkedIn through Skype has got anything he wanted to share with us.
He can hear, but he can't talk.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So,
Okay.
no, I mean, like I said, the thing with David is like we keep in touch. Again, part of the point is if you have a lot of contacts, if you're lucky enough to have contacts, it's using Facebook or Skype or LinkedIn, whatever, or Zoom to keep in touch with people. I mean, I had a lady this morning who was made redundant from the company I used to contract for, and she asked me for some advice about something. And it's quite good to keep in touch, I find, with people like that, because for that, in that instance, it cheered her up immensely to have the ability to talk in English in that case, because she's French and she always talks in French.
Yeah.
Just, you know, to have contact with people, to remind them yourselves that there is a world out there, because in France, for example, at the moment, they've shut down even more than here. They have curfews and what have you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in Surrey, by the way, so it hasn't come down quite as much as if you were wherever, Manchester. But it's still, you know, on your mind, so that you need, it's good to keep in touch with people, I think.
Yeah, and that's interesting from a couple aspects as well, John, because of course the French are, you could argue, a little bit more closer and very tactile rather than the Brits, aren't they? And I know we worked in France together as well. They're all kissing 3 or 4 times and hugging and all the rest of it. So it must be really, really difficult for them. But equally,
It is.
as well,
Yeah. So I was
equally,
going to say it did, yeah.
yeah. I think the term socially distancing is also a bit of a problem as well, because I think socially we need to be as close as possible. It's the physical distancing that we need to maintain with the 2 meters or the 1 meter or whatever it is. So I think that also can, if you think about it as socially distant, it almost tries to sever that connection. So it's really great to hear that you're maintaining that, John, through all the virtual channels.
Yeah, I mean, I keep in touch with the people I liked, put it that way, and the ones that could be useful.
I don't know about you, Keith. Have you got any useful routines that, you know, since lockdown started that you've managed to use?
Yeah, yours is much more organised than mine, which is why I'm really thankful to be working with Sue, because she will attest that I'm not very well organised or structured. The
I wouldn't say that,
has
Keith.
been useful for me in terms of to put some distance between me and my business, and given me, as John mentioned earlier, a chance to breathe, almost a chance to think and reflect in a way that, you know, business was so noisy before, constant distractions, and so it takes me sometimes, maybe it's that age I've reached, but it takes me about half an hour to get my brain into gear. You know, so all of this Pomodoro timing and doing it in 25-second or 25-minute sprints, you know, it takes me 25 minutes just to get my in the zone. And then when I'm in the zone, I can stay there for 2.5 hours without, you know, without realizing what's happening. It has been very, very useful from that point of view.
Right. Really good positives.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And so I know you missed some of that because you took your call away.
Yeah, slightly.
Is there any positive small routines and habits that you've picked up during pandemic that you know, are going to carry forward for you?
No, hopefully not. I'm going to improve on them, because I used to be really organised and I'm not now. I am sort of like, personally, because it's sort of like all lockdown, I seem to have got less routine now than I would have had before. And it's really annoying me, because that's not my nature. You know, organisation is key here. You know, everything's sort of like 3 months in advance. And although it is still like that, it's not in the way I want it to be. So I'm trying to get back to where I should be, really. And I think I still focus better in when I was going out, seeing people, doing that kind of thing, having the social interactions was my thing. Now I don't have that as much. I don't mind the isolation, it doesn't bother me, but it's sort of, I feel I'm less productive at the moment in my own world. And I think because I'm slightly slower, I'm less productive on that basis as well.
Yeah, interesting view.
I know, yeah. It's not interesting at all. It's really worrying. Apart from that.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's some strategies still to come, Sue, that you might be able to pick up on.
Absolutely. I'm hopeful.
Move on. Is the A stands for attitude. And I mean, I've learned this. I started life as a project manager and now moved into the world of coaching project managers. And I've learned the easy and the hard way. The way that I show up is the way that everybody else shows up for me. Okay, so it's about being professional, but equally it's about, you know, choosing your response as well. So there's this thing about response versus reaction. You know, very often when people see the red mist and just the objectivity of a situation goes, and then the event plus the reaction becomes the outcome, and the event itself might have been only very, very tiny, but the whole thing just blows up out of proportion. And I think there's a really great passage, you can see this book, it's called Man's Search for Meaning by a guy called Viktor Frankl. Now, this guy was in the concentration camps in World War II, actually a survivor, and he wrote this book. And what he says basically is that he had everything taken away from him, you know, his clothes, his books, all his belongings. But the one thing they couldn't take away from him was his ability to choose his attitude at any given point. And what he says is, at the point between something happening and your response, there's a gap there where you can choose. And very often it's like, choose to reduce that impact so the outcome is also small as well. So for example, going back to my BT broadband, you know, I must have spoken to 30 different people at BT, and every single time I spoke to them, it was somebody different, and I had to recant the entire story all over again. Now, I have to say, a few years ago, I probably would have gone mad and wanted to escalate complaints, problems, and all the rest of it, but I had to realise that the person on the other end of the phone, it wasn't their fault. They were trying to help me, and you know, I don't know what went on for them during the course of the day before they got to me, but it doesn't do my cause any good if I just go on an outburst. I just need to do it. In the end, I have to write it all down so I could read from it every single time. But it was frustrating. It taught me more about BT than it taught me about myself. But my response was just to dial it down a bit, just to be that little bit more withdrawn, and you know, breathing as well really helped. But you know, it told me that if I start to behave outside of my normal zone, people start to behave like that towards me as well. And the other thing on here is it be it cause, not effect. So I don't know if any of you guys are movie buffs at all, but if you watch the original Matrix, this is a great metaphor for cause and effect. If you take the red pill or the blue pill and all those sort of things. And what I would say here is always be in control, always be responsible. Don't allow yourself to become the victim. And very often you become the victim when you're on the effect of something. Now, however you see the COVID situation at the moment and the way it's been dealt with globally, I think we can all agree on the fact that we're all gripped by fear. And we'll come on to fear in just a moment, but fear is one thing that makes all of us quite malleable to fall into line to do various things. But what I would say to you is be responsible for what you can be responsible for, and in effect, control the controllables. And great sort of quote here, which sort of encapsulates better than what I could say in the last few minutes. It's your reaction to what's going on rather than what's going on itself that makes the real difference in all of this. And this is a very busy slide, so I'm just going to allow you a moment or two to look at it. But there's fundamentally a lot of things that we can control and lots of things we can't control. Now, I know many of these in my own life, I thought I could change people, for example, and people thought they could change me. And of course, it doesn't happen, you know, and we have no agency over how other people react, what they say, what they do. I mean, the classic, of course, is trying to make other people happy. It's trying to make other people motivated. And fundamentally, both of those things are an inside job. Only yourself can make yourself happy. And that can be through positive thought, as we're talking about, but no one else can do it for you. Unless, of course, you come across what I would describe as energy vampires, those people in society that just suck all the life out of you and almost discard you at the side of the road, and they feel great because they've offloaded, they've got what they want. And frankly, I avoid them. I remove them from my social circle because they don't serve me well. Instead, what I do, because the other term I've got for it is radiators and drains. So I seek people that I can grow with, like-minded people. It's a famous quote by a guy called Jim Rohn, if anyone's ever heard of him, mentor to the great US coach Tony Robbins. And he said, you are the average of the 5 people you keep the most company with. So if you keep good company, you're more than likely to raise your own game and become a much better version of yourself. And conversely, of course, if you spend time in bad company, then you tend to go down. Well, you might bring other people up because, of course, you're there with the more perhaps higher moral standing, but overall you will reduce in your impact.
Nigel, if I can, on your previous slide, I've seen a sort of animated version of this, which is that character from Pirates of the Caribbean, Johnny Depp. Is it Jack Sparrow?
Jack Sparrow.
And he says it's not the problem which is the problem; it's the attitude, your attitude to the problem, which is the problem. And there you go, on the movie front. That's a good one.
And actually, Keith, there's lots of all great movies have got a story to them, and story is the art of communication. And there's always hidden gems in many of those things. But thank you for pointing that out. And I just want to touch on fear for a moment, because as humans, we are only afraid of two things. I don't know how that came across. Is that playing again, is it? Oh, no, that's it now. You can see I'll practice this, guys, can't you? So I do apologise. That's one not to use again. I'm not going to do that again. But what I was going to say was that fundamentally, as humans, we're born with a fear of only two things. One of them is loud noises, which is what that was meant to represent. And you're all meant to leap out of your chair thinking, oh my God, what was that? But never mind. Does anybody know what the second fear we're born with is?
Is it depth, perception, heights?
Very close, Keith, very close. It's a primal instinct more than anything else.
Banks?
Sorry? Banks.
Banks.
Banks. Okay, so we're born with two fears. One is loud noises, and the second is a fear of falling. Okay, and that's it. So everything else in life, okay, if you take a baby, for example, I mean, a baby actually is frightened of loud noises. I remember once when I'd got hay fever, I sneezed, not at the baby, but close to it. And this baby stopped breathing for what was like 10 seconds. And I thought, OMG, it finally came back. And I'd even dispute the fact that babies are frightened of falling, because most of the time they're sort of so headstrong, they just do whatever they need to do. But fundamentally, everything else in life, through parenting, through education, and through environment, and through the workplace, about things, well, you're not good enough, you're not fast enough, you're not quick enough, you're too old, you're too young. All of those type of things shapes us and holds us in a grip of fear, so we don't do stuff. It's an inhibitor, creates inertia, so we don't get things done. But fundamentally, we will always be afraid of loud noises and fear of falling. And I don't know if any of you have ever been on any vocational, or sorry, non-vocational activities where you're blindfolded and you're asked to fall backwards and trust that someone will catch you, or drive around in Land Rovers off-road blindfold, and someone sitting in the passenger seat saying, turn left here. It's off-road, by the way, not on the public road. Turn left, turn right, and you put your trust into somebody else. So what I'm here to say is that fundamentally, everything else that we think is fear is what we've made up and put a barrier around ourselves. Sometimes it's called ego, that false facade of this thing that we make up, that we believe in, but nobody else sees. And the way I'd like you to think about fear is on two fronts, really. It's false evidence appears real. Okay, so we convince ourselves we're not good enough. We convince ourselves we're too old, or we're too young, or we're too fat, or we're too slim, or we're too dumb, or sometimes too intelligent. And the other way I'd like you to remember fear is forget everything and run, because that's typically what we do. When things get a little bit too hard, or there's a barrier, we tend to about turn and go off in the other direction. Oh no, didn't want that to happen.
Something?
Of course.
I had somebody who told me once, people who think too much are much more feared of things than people who don't think at all. And he was a military guy who said the best soldiers tend to be the ones who don't think and just do things. And I found that over time, that's an interesting concept, because I mean, I think everyone's feared of things or frightened of things, but that's something to remember, that in fact, different types of person can be impacted differently, and some people have no fear at all.
And I don't know whether all of you are familiar with, I know you've done it, John, Sue. Graham, were you on the thing I did on disc profiling at all?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so I'll try and explain it in very open terms. So pretty much there's 4 styles for disc personality probing, 2 above the line on extrovert for task and people, and 2 below the line on the introversion spectrum for task and people. And it's interesting what you say there, John, because typically the people that reflect and think a lot are the introverts, okay? And they typically are the people that would read that opportunity is now here as opportunity is nowhere. Their glass half full. They have to consider all the options, analyze all the details before they make a decision. So they're not going to leap in and do stuff. Where more the extroverts on both task and people side, you know, it's a classic case. Donald Trump, for example, is ready, fire, aim, you know, which sometimes is what you need, but not always. And it's interesting what you point out there, because you're absolutely right. People that overanalyze stuff are not going to be quick to make decisions or take action, typically. Yeah, it's a really good thing to find out. Just want to move on now to the I of my model. And this is about really working out what's important. And it's really about doing what's right, what I would call over what's easy. Now, again, as humans, we seek pleasure over pain. We all seek instant gratification. And very often that comes from doing easy things. Now, I don't know if any of you have read this book called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And in it, he talks about doing the ugliest, hardest task every single morning just to get it out of the way, because then everything will become much, much easier. What tends to happen is that the ugliest and hardest thing is something that we put off. We do the easy stuff because we like it, and that big thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger, starts to fill our rear view mirror, and until there's a point where we can't avoid it. And then when you do start to tackle it, it's much, much harder to do. Yeah, so there's that. Speed over perfection, and this is another great disc style one again, John, because again, below the line with people that overanalyze, look at the detail, look for certainty, tend to breed more perfectionists. And of course, there is no such thing as perfectionism at all. And sometimes speed is much, much, much better because you're getting things done, you're doing stuff. We've all heard about fail fast, because when you fail fast, you learn more as you go along. Not all organizational cultures, by the way, embrace that style because, you know, they don't want to get things wrong. But fundamentally, it is about, you know, progress over perfection, I think, is probably a better way of putting that. And banish distractions. Now, for a long time, I had my phone on grayscale, and when it was on grayscale, it was so unattractive to pick up and look at. All the notifications were quite dull, you know, and the phone would lay there for hours and I wouldn't pick it up. Now, that was a bit of a curse and a blessing for me, because sometimes there was stuff I really wanted to know about, and notifications are useful. But actually what I've done on the phone and pretty much on the desktop is turned off the ones I don't really need to know. So for example, email ones, WhatsApp and stuff like that, which is just natural distraction that just gets in the way. I sort of do like an hour in the morning, maybe I'll do a bit over lunch, and then later in the evening. Unless I'm expecting something to come through, I'll try and timetable it a little bit, perhaps a little bit, John, like you got your schedule, you know, we talked about before. And the one thing I also want to make you aware of is very often it's a real advantage if you can make your work visible as well. So as I mentioned before, there's a big quote there from Louis Pasteur about chance favouring the prepared. So, you know, there's that great saying, isn't it? Proper preparation prevents poor performance. And sometimes, you know, the definition of luck actually can be where opportunity meets preparation. And I often find if you are prepared and then something comes along, you're able to get on that bus or join whatever it is, rather than going from a standing start. So quite like that quote. Yeah, but what I was talking about, making your work visible, I spent a lot of my time in my formative years in automotive. Now, working at Rover, worked very closely with Honda. Japanese back in the 80s and 90s were top draw when it came to quality, and frankly still are. And they were using simple techniques after World War II, when the Japanese economy and the nation had to rebuild in a different way to how Europe had to rebuild. And Japanese focus was on right first time. I think we can see the demise, for example, of the British motor industry in the 60s, because they just built things with whatever they could. The only reason a Land Rover was made out of aluminium, because that was the most available metal to them at that point in time. But there's also complacency about quality in the British motor industry, and they just thought, we can, whatever we build, we can sell. So there's no real driver to improve. And of course, once the Japanese started improving, the British market went down. And what I want to talk about here is something called simple Kanban, and it's just about making work visible. And none of this is new. You might hear it talked about when people start talking about agile project management, okay? But fundamentally, this is just, you can get tools for it online. I've got it on just a whiteboard on the other side of my office, just a load of post-it notes. You've got to prioritize what's important to you, and then you just stick them in 3 columns of to do, in progress, and done, and just move it through. And the very process of making it visible brings it to life a lot more. Yeah, so it actually makes it easier to see what's going on, and you see actually what you've achieved and what you've done as well. And the other great thing it does, and the reason it was really important in automotive back in certainly the 80s, is there's a big push to reduce inventory, because inventory is cost. So where you've got a lot of work in progress, that's money that's tied up doing nothing. So that middle column of in progress, you want to be as lean as possible. So you've got a lot of stuff to do, and you've done stuff which can clearly be sold and moved on. You don't want too much in progress. And the other bit about the in progress stuff is that this is where this faceted world of multitasking comes in, okay? And what I'd like to do in just a moment is a little exercise to see how effective multitasking might be. But does it make sense in what I've just explained there to everybody? Yeah? Excellent. Great. So what I'd like to do at this point, if I can just get back on the right again. I just want to just do a little bit of a bit of a fun test, really, just to see, does multitasking actually work? So because we've got a small number, this will probably work quite well. Can I just ask everybody if they could just to get hold of a pen and a piece of paper, please? And hopefully John David can hear this over the ether in Nairobi. And yeah, so I'll just wait for Graham to get back, and I'll just explain the rules, which is very simple. But what I'd like to articulate through this point is the relative effectiveness of how multitasking either helps or hinders our progress. Sue, I mean, it's a classic woman thing, isn't it? They always claim to be the best multitaskers in the world. And what's your view on multitasking?
I am a multitasker. Okay. Yeah.
And how do you find it?
I personally find it okay. I'm quite good at it, I think. Okay. But then maybe there's a better way. I don't know. Okay. I am really guilty at that. Yeah. Okay. Never happier than when I've got about 300 things to do.
Okay. So we're going to do a very simple exercise. It involves nothing more than writing something down on a piece of paper. But is everybody familiar, before I start, with Roman numerals from 1 to 12? Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, and then it's IV, V, VI, VII, VIII, IX, X, XI, X, II. If it's a problem, I'll explain it now. Just repeat the normal 1 to 12. But what we're going to do, first of all, I'd like you, don't start yet because I will be timing. And when you've done it, can you just put your hand up, okay? We're going to do one straight exercise. The first exercise is to write 1 to 12, the Roman numerals 1 to 12. If you don't know them all, just write 1 to 12 again, and then go letters A, B, C, all the way through to L. Does everybody understand that? Simple exercise. So I'm going to say go in a moment. Don't start yet, Sue. A bit of cheating going on there. When you finish, could you just put your hand up when you've finished? And I'm just going to time it. There's nothing sinister in this. It's just a fun exercise. So numbers 1 to 12, Roman numerals 1 to 12, letters A to L. So go 1 to 12, 1 to 12, A to L. Go. So just stick your hand up when you're finished. Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, okay. That was between 24 and 34 seconds, that was. So what I'd like you to do now is we're going to do exactly the same exercise, but what I want you to do now, this is the multitasking exercise. We're still going to do the same thing, but I want you to go 1, and then 1 in Roman numerals, and then A, and then 2, 2, B. Don't start yet, please don't start yet. And then 3, 3, C. Is everybody clear? Okay. And so you can start now. And again, please put your hand up when you're finished. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, John.
David.
Oh, great, thanks. Thank you, Keith. Thank you. Okay, excellent. So, just before I reveal the times on that, what did everyone think about that simple exercise?
I thought it was easier the second time than the first time, personally, but
Okay, interesting.
Much harder second time.
Well, Graham, what do you think made it harder?
Because you had more to think about, and so instead of thinking about one thing and then just doing it 1 to 12, the next thing, you were kind of cross-referencing things. Yeah. And it just, in terms of my brain, it just slowed it down because I had to think about things more.
Okay, well, in the first exercise, there was a range of 24 to 34 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to cut that, say 29, that's sort of halfway. Then the second exercise, the quickest one was 40 seconds and the longest one was 56. So what's that? So call that 48 seconds. Okay, so over that simple exercise, it took 2/3 as long to complete it because we were multitasking. And all I'll say about this, I think multitasking can work, but it's not efficient and it takes longer. And the best advice, and again, it comes out in this book as well, best advice is once you start one task, is to finish it before you go on to anything else. Mm-hmm. But it's like what we spoke about earlier about distractions and being pulled off onto different things. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's whatever works for yourself. But actually, Graham, the point you picked up on is exactly the thing that makes multitasking difficult, because you start something, you have to do something else. And when you come back again, you've got to retune and think about what you were doing to carry on with that one. and then you get interrupted again and go somewhere else and do something else. And all the good text says to just focus on completing one thing at a time. It's meant to be the holy grail for productivity, but of course in this day and age many people find it quite easy to get distracted. Okay, but thanks for taking part in that. It's just meant to be a little bit of fun. Before we move on, we've only got to I at the moment, so is everyone good for the next half an hour?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've talked about positive routine, we've talked about attitude, we've talked about working out what's really important. So the next one is try something new. Okay, and I touched on some of these a little bit earlier, in that I do reading, you could write or paint. I mean, recently I've started to write a lot more blogs and articles than I used to, and everyone will tell you there's a book in everyone, and I actually have got a bit of a chapter list already, so maybe a book is coming to me. I've also reconnected with music. I badly showed that a little bit earlier, but sometimes music's really great because it takes you back to a time and place we had a really great feeling, where you might have been on holiday with somebody else or whatever else, and listening to music can be a great anchor to get you back to those times and spaces. You can also dust down what I call your deja vu goals. These are the goals you've set in life that keep coming around with amazing regularity because, of course, you don't take any action on them. And very often, the reason most people don't achieve their goals, apart from the fact they don't really know what they want, is they never really stick a date on them. When you stick a date on a goal, it makes it a little bit more real and gives you a stake to put in the ground. And if you do end up with a situation where you've got a goal statement with a date, I would encourage you to write it down, and I would also encourage you to read it out as well. Positive affirmations really work to help you move forward, but really also focus on what makes you feel good. I've had a lot of conversations over lockdown with a lot of people that are regressing into childhood about all the stuff they used to love and do there. I had people even get their Scalextric tracks out and stuff like that because it's what they loved. And so there might have been some dormant things or some things that you used to love doing that you don't do any longer. Got amazing amount of reflective time right now. And even if reading doesn't appeal to you, maybe listening to podcasts or listening to blogs is a thing that you can do. And I guess with that sort of thing in mind, is there something new that you guys have done during lockdown, or is there something new that you could do now? Is there any thoughts out there at all?
I've kind of started running.
Okay.
And when I say kind of started, I'm slow and I haven't gone very far yet, but I'm doing it basically. So there's a bit of fitness thing going in there.
Good. And has anyone tried anything that's pushed them outside of their comfort zone at all since March? I mean, that comfort zone might actually be quite natural and normal right now, but maybe when you first tried it, it was a little bit difficult or new.
Putting my sales course together, which has been in the back of my mind for probably a couple of years. Lockdown has been good from the point of view of creating the content initially, but to sort of sharp intake of breath and actually schedule it and make it real I've found very, very scary, because all of a sudden there was something to go wrong, something to fail on.
Fear, maybe. So what Keith, was the difference that made the difference for you?
I think some positive feedback or affirmation that I'd gotten from a couple of people. I socialized the content first, if you like. Got some feedback, constructive feedback, but also got some positive feedback relative to other webinars that people have put on. And I thought, actually, okay, I feel confident, because no one wants to look stupid, right? So, no. I felt, okay, I've got enough I've got enough diverse inputs now from credible people to say, yes, okay, this passes muster.
Great. Anybody else found themselves doing something new they hadn't done before? John?
I've actually discovered for other people how the full benefit system works and all the rules and regulations and all the ins and outs that I absolutely knew nothing about before. I was not at all interested.
Yeah.
And over the past 6 months, I've had to find out stuff which I'm unbelievably amazing. And in fact, I've worked out things that people could claim that they never knew about before.
Oh, John, we must have a conversation later.
That's unbelievable.
It's interesting. It's like a subject that you had no desire or interest in, but sometimes it's like most things in life. You put a bit of investment into it, and before you know where you are, you're head over heels into it, and you're actually quite passionate about finding things out. It's quite. I used to remember when I used to watch TV, like darts and snooker, really dull, boring games. But if I'm there with a cup of tea for 20 minutes, I won't leave it till I watch the end of it or the next frame or where it's going. It just draws you in. It's almost like a really great movie. You tend to lose yourself for a while. So
If you get into the ins and outs and the furlough scheme and all the applications for bounce back loans and all the other loans and everything, and then finding out who to speak and who to contact and all that.
That sounds really great. Thanks. Anything for yourself at all, Graham?
Interestingly, from a kind of sales perspective, if you look at everything that's happened with COVID, it's kind of really difficult to get hold of people now to try and prospect, and you either can't get hold of people because they're working from home or nobody's answering phones. So what I've started to do, which was really uncomfortable at first, is I started to investigate using video in prospecting. So I started doing a few videos, and the company I work for now, we're going to make that our main prospecting tool, basically so that your message stands out and is a bit different from all the 100 calls that people get. So to start off with, doing a video and then watching it back, I kind of hated that, and I would cringe because your voice when you hear it back isn't the same voice that you hear when you speak. But I absolutely love doing them now. So I'm in the process of doing personalised videos for some of my LinkedIn contacts.
Excellent.
We do mass kind of videos to our prospect base, which is in the early kind of doors situation, but it's just something that I've really enjoyed doing that I didn't think I would.
Yeah, and that almost goes back to that Darwin thing, doesn't it, about adaptability? You knew things had to change, therefore you've done something different. And, you know, it's almost like a Kubler-Ross thing as well, Graham, because when you first started about doing it, I mean, I think for everybody that first hears themselves, it's like, Christ, I don't look like that and I don't sound like that. But the realization I had was that, well, that's how everybody else sees me. So I've got to get comfortable with this pretty quick. Otherwise, you know, this thing called fear surrounds us again, doesn't it, really? So that's a really great story. Yes, John?
The thing I like about that also is that I think you suddenly realize other people suddenly appreciate that you can do that, and you never thought that you could do that particular topic to so many people. And the feedback from others saying, you know, you're not bad at that is actually, I think, quite empowering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And feedback is, particularly when it's the right type of feedback given in the right way. I think Ken Blanchard called it the breakfast of champions, didn't he, Keith? I think in all the great management guru training and stuff. Really great stories there. You've gone dark there, John. Are you okay? Can you still see us all right?
No, that's a big rain cloud coming over. Sorry, it is huge. So big black cloud.
So that's Surrey. Okay. Excellent. I just want to move on to the B of rainbows then. So this is all about what we started the session with. So just remembering to breathe. And story I've got around this is that, I mean, not recently, but I guess most people have in the last couple of years been on a flight. Now, of course, does anybody ever listen to the safety briefing on the plane when they sit comfortably in their chair? You know, and
I could repeat it myself.
I've got to be honest. I was couple of years ago, I was going to Dublin quite regularly, and Dublin from Birmingham is like less than an hour. But the captain said something quite profound, and he said, I know the safety briefing's a bit dull, he said, but it might just save your life. And I'd never really thought about it like that before, because I never realised my life was in danger, because he's looking after me. I think I'm going to be fine. And anyway, he did the safety briefing, and of course, they say things like, in the sudden event of a loss of cabin pressure, and you're thinking to yourself, well, what must be going on for that to happen? And then you get all the, going back to the film metaphor, you start thinking about airplane and all that sort of stuff, where they're playing the in-screen movies of plane crashes, and the drinks trolley's going hurtling down the aisle, things are falling from the overhead lockers, you got the nun with a truncheon, going through, and there's absolute chaos going on, all the lights are flickering, the cabin's rocking and rolling, doing all this. And then they say, these masks will drop from the compartment above your head, and what we want you to do is put it around your nose and mouth and breathe normally. So when you consider you're out of control, you're probably, in one of the worst spaces and phases in your life you can be, and they want you to calm down and just breathe normally. And that's really great advice, because as we've seen from our starting exercise, when you are more centered with your breathing, you can think a little bit more rationally. And the other added thing they say on those safety briefings is help somebody else when you've got your own mask on first. So you can't help anybody else unless you're sorted and grounded. And the thing I sort of read into that is you can't pour from an empty cup, basically. So if you're not in the right place, you're not in the right place to help other people. But just moving on. Sorry, Keith.
My old boss at EDS was telling me a story about when he was working in China. Took an internal flight from somewhere to somewhere in the mid-1980s, and it was his first ever internal flight. And they took off, and he put his hand up, and the cabin member of the cabin crew came over, and she said to him, "Yes, can I help?" And he said, "You haven't done a safety briefing. Why haven't you done a safety briefing?" And she said to him, and I quote, "We crash, we die."
So Chinese.
It wasn't Ryanair, was it?
I hope I haven't put anyone off flying, but
that's just, I know John spent a lot of time in China, but I've been there a couple of times, and I went with Sue, my partner, and we weren't allocated seats because we're together. We were allocated seats on the basis of our first name, so we were like several rows apart. It was really quite odd. This was a few years ago, so it might have changed. But the reason I put the green dots on the screen there is that very often you can get these, if you've got these type of things, the sticky dots, but I sort of stick them maybe on the TV remote or on the fridge door, if I can get away with it, or somewhere else where I'll see it once or twice a day. And that's just a reminder to me to do that 4x4x4 technique that we started this event with, because very often when we're rushing around and feeling out of breath and all the rest of it, we do need that recovery time during the day. Now, very often I used to think it was tea or coffee, but actually just taking less than 3 minutes out just to do some deep breathing really makes a huge difference. And of course, the reminder here is just to say, when was the last time you put your oxygen mask on first? Take care of yourself before you try and help others. So far, so good. Yeah, good. Okay, then. Great.
To mute myself because the rain is so strong outside.
Okay, no worries, John. Just stick your hand up when you want to join us. That's no problem. So the O of rainbows, I've figuratively called the outer net, and that is in stark contrast, of course, to the internet, which of course we're using the benefits of today. But really what I want to try and share with you now is really just to be present and mindful to what's going on. And the way I see mindfulness is really paying attention to things on purpose, to things you normally don't do. And I think for me, the onset of lockdown back in March and April was quite profound, because I could walk down the centre of our road in our village, and it's almost like I turn the clock back 300 years, because there were no cars, and I could hear nature, I could hear the birds, I could see all the blossom falling from the trees, and I was paying attention to it. And very often I'd just ignore all of those things. I was feeling the the sort of the crunch of the grass under my feet, and all these bizarre things that I would never actually consider. And it's just, I don't know if you can pick up the sound in the background, but there's a bit of a building site next door to where I am. So sometimes there's a clunk of metal onto tarmac. And again, sometimes we filter all these things out. It's just distractionary stuff. But sometimes it pays attention. Sorry, it pays on us to pay attention to it. And of course, we talk about what goes on in our mind. We've talked about fear already, about the situations we create for ourselves, and it's a case of not letting that overwhelm us. And sometimes being a bit more mindful can sort of clear that distraction away from us, where we dial our mind down a little bit. Because very often, worry is, somebody told me the definition of worrying once, which is like praying for bad things to happen. And very often, of course, the things we worry about don't happen at all. Or they're things outside of our control. If you go back to that the controllables thing that we had, we can't influence them. We can only control a certain amount of things. So, it's as best as you can to try and let them go. And again, one of the techniques I used, which I talked about earlier on my daily prime, was about journaling. And even, you can add a bit at the end of that. I know people that do the 3 things they're grateful for, then add how they're feeling or what they feel they are out of 10 on that particular day, and chart all those sort of things. So these things, my advice would be, try it before you trash it. It doesn't work for everybody. And, like we said before with routine, if you can get into that sort of mechanized approach, maybe it's got some benefit in there for you. But just moving on from that, a really great quote that I like is that, there is no Wi-Fi in nature, but you will get that better connection, really. So I guess my question at this point is really about, what do you do to experience the outer net, or what do you do to be more mindful in what you're doing right now? Is there anything that anybody's doing to sort of take in the great outdoors, or just to dial down a little bit, or breathe a bit more, or relax?
I think on a personal level, if I take the dog for a walk, it's a nice sunny day, obviously helps. You do remember that things are still relatively normal, and that keeps your head in the right place sometimes if you're stressing out about other things. I'm a big one for watching the news, which is a huge mistake, to be honest with you. I've learned that, but I still do it. And I think if you take the dog for a walk and just do something that's relatively...
Well, your sound's gone a bit there.
Perceived threat. Sorry.
Yeah.
You back again? Yeah.
You're back. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, so I think just try and keep things as normal, and sort of, I suppose, see the good bits better, almost.
It's interesting what you said there about the news, because after the first week of lockdown, where it felt like we were in a Hollywood film, and Boris, I think, was at his best then, wasn't he? I mean, Boris for me is a bit like Churchill, good for a crisis, really. Yeah. And we had a crisis going on, and I think in the early days he was really good. And it felt like you had to be there at 5 o'clock just to see how bad it was going to get. But very quickly after that, I realised it was taking me into a bit of a downward spiral, because I would ruminate over the news thinking, how am I going to cope? What can I do? I realised there's not a lot I can do at all. So all I do now is just look out for the headlines on the radio in the morning and just leave it. Because what I don't know about, I can't worry about. And you could argue it's been a little bit ignorance in that sense, but it just keeps me a bit safer in my head.
I don't know if anybody else thinks the same, but obviously in the first part of lockdown, everybody's in this together. It's affecting everybody. In theory, we're all locked in. But the second time, where we've been allowed out a bit, and we've sort of gone back into lockdowns has affected me so much more than the first time almost, because it seems a bit weird. You can, but you can't. You could, but you might not. And all of this sort of thing. So to me, it's a little bit worse this time around than it was the first time. Hence why I'm finding the dog walking, quite therapeutic.
No, anybody else feeling like that?
No, I think what's interesting is people were more together at the beginning. This time it's almost like keep away from everyone.
Yeah.
I think that's right. There was, for me, there was a bit of a Dunkirk spirit when this first started out, as you mentioned, Sue. And it was, in fact, I wrote a blog about, we had a real societal undoing at one time, Brexit, which really polarized the nation. And then another societal undoing, COVID, which is somehow bringing the nation together. So it was quite an interesting sort of change in circumstances. I think I went through something similar, but I suspect many of us are getting to the point where, God, the fun's over now. Let's try and get back to some sort of sense of normal, not the old world, but much of the new. And there is a little bit of frustration setting into me. But I think what's important is we all behave slightly differently, and it's whatever works for you to get you through and keep you whole and sane, kind of going forward. So thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry. Keith knows this because I do a lot of decorating, but that's my solace. That's sort of like I can switch off at that. I can sort of be alone with my pot of paint, and the whole house is getting done. So that's all good stuff. But it takes me out of whatever I'm thinking at the time, be it the news or everything else. And you just think, okay, that's fine. I can lose myself in it, and I'm so much better when I'm doing that.
That's great.
I think I'm the same as Sue. I've made the mistake of continually watching the news, and I should really just knock it on the head because it's so depressing. And I think the media in general have behaved absolutely appallingly.
Oh, I totally agree there.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
Unbelievable, really. And they've just, they've just painted everything as black as they can, and they've deliberately put people against each other, and it's just I just wish I'd kind of like switch the telly off and not listen to anything, because it goes back to your point about the things you can't control. You've just got to accept to get on with it.
Absolutely. And interestingly, just on that, and Sue gave me a trigger there. Very often, of course, we can lose ourselves in great films, can't we? And there's bizarrely at the very start of lockdown, I don't know if anyone's got Netflix, but there's a film called Contagion.
I was just going to say that, Nigel, because I watched that and it scared the crap out of me, because it was about our numbers, respiratory pandemics, bats, the whole bloody lot.
And I don't know about anyone that's seen it, but for me, the most poignant part of the whole film was the last minute when it showed how it was contracted from bats, I think, was it into pigs or something, Graham, on that open market, then into human in that restaurant. I mean, it's almost like we're playing out in a sort of Hollywood movie in this sense.
Yeah, I think it was the bat went down onto a pig and bit the pig, and then the pig was going to slaughter and went to a restaurant, and people ate the food, and that way.
And the chef has been preparing food, goes out to meet Gwyneth Paltrow, wipes his uniform, shakes hands. And that's why I wash my hands after shaking everyone's hands, because I saw it back in 2011 when it was first made. You're right. I tell you what we did, and actually it was really cathartic, is we watched it to celebrate going into lockdown, because it was to somehow get your head into that space. It was useful, but we watched it when lockdown had officially sort of ended again, just to do a compare and contrast. It was quite interesting.
It was interesting what you said a few moments ago as well, Keith. It's almost like we've all played by the rules and done everything that everybody wanted us to do, but it's still not good enough to get us out of where we are currently, is it? And that's where that frustration element comes in a little bit, I think.
Most of us played by the rules.
Mm.
There's a story in there somewhere, Keith, I think.
Well,
Tell.
and those that didn't quite publicly didn't get reprimanded, did they? And that's almost like there's one rule for one and one rule for somebody else.
But that's where the media make it worse, because they highlight it and they make a fuss about something, which is, it's not fair, because, you know, I have people who are my friends up north and down south. That's irrelevant. Why do they use that sort of terminology? It's wrong, really, to try to divide people like that, where everyone's in it together. Doesn't matter where you live.
Interesting. Great. I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I want to move on a little bit. I just want to do a brief summary. We've covered trying something new, and, you know, remembering to breathe and take time and breathe deeply to control ourselves a bit more, and maybe look at things away, offline a little bit as well to get the outer net. Just want to move on to the final furlong for the last two. And as you'll notice, a lot of these are all interrelated, and I trust actually that, as I said at the start, really, I'm not telling you stuff you don't already know, really, but just packaging it in a way that's easy for you to digest. The W is about well-being. Okay, so Sue, you mentioned about walking the dog and being active. John, you've talked about your routines in the morning and stuff like that. Of course, one thing we all need right now as humans is an immune system that's strong. The only way it's strong is by being active and eating the right things, drinking the right things, and getting the right amount of sleep. Okay, which again is difficult when you've got all this paranoia of news and everything else coming on. But you know, as I say, we do need that immune system to keep us going. Now, of course, I'm no nutritionist, but I suppose for yourselves, you can work out what works best for you and what you need to eat and what's good, bad, or indifferent. And really all about sleeping as well. This Fitbit sort of gives me some statistics on my sleep. I wouldn't say it's particularly accurate, but what I would say is it gives me a trend over time, and sometimes it measures, well, not sometimes, it always measures deep, light and REM sleep. And I can always tell my mood is better in the morning if I've had a lot of REM sleep, so my mind's been active and been very creative. Deep sleep actually is the one that repairs your body, so you know, you can wake up feeling a bit fresher in the morning. When you do have, you know, pretty crap night's sleep rather than your stats are all over the place, and you look at it, you think, I can understand why now. So actually, you know, go back to routine, you know, go to bed at similar times every night and stuff like that. I know that, anyone ever heard of Wim Hof and his breathing method? Dutch guy, I think it's Wim Hof. He's got books and everything, and it's amazing. You can actually get books on breathing, but he's got some. But he also does something called cold water therapy as well. And I'll admit something to you now. So for the last 18 months, whenever I take a shower, it's always in cold water. Okay. And exactly what you're saying, Keith, is exactly the response every single time. Well, to be honest, I get into it when it's hot. I'll clean myself, and then for at least 3 minutes, I'll switch it to cold, and it's like a dichotomy of sort of experience, because there's nothing more refreshing than to feel the cold water, but equally nothing prepares you for it when it first lands, because you get that comforting, it's nice and warm, and then all of a sudden, bang, it's digital, it goes to cold, absolutely freezing. But apparently, if you listen to this Wim Hof guy, he says that, you know, bathing or using cold water therapy, cold showers, boosts your immune system. You know, it does stuff to your skin to make it more supple and all this sort of stuff. I don't know whether it works. I've just made it a habit now, and I just feel it does actually wake me up a damn sight quicker. And the other thing it does do, I don't know, when you've had a hot shower and you step out of the shower, you instantly feel cold, don't you? But when you've had a cold shower and you stand out into the normal room, you're at room temperature, so you're fine. But I would only advise it, you know, just see what it's like. I mean, sometimes we mistakenly get in the shower, it's already on cold, and it gives you a bit of a shock. But I've just made it a habit right now.
I think you're training for the SAS in secret, Nigel.
Good training, yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say the Romans did it, didn't they? The Frigidarium, and then you get into the hot hot a tub afterwards, so you're just repeating something that happened in the past.
Well, I remember seeing shots of Andy Murray when he used to be quite decent at tennis, taking all these ice baths and stuff. And apparently it's good for recovery and healing, but if not a little extreme, really. But the other thing I've got on there as well is about connecting and finding your tribe. And John, you've picked on this already when you talked about your friend in France, and you clearly you've got David in Nigeria there, and trying to keep
Nairobi.
Yeah, and it's really, really difficult, isn't it? And a bit like I said earlier about the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, make that a rich collection of people around you that enable you to grow. And I think, as we've also spoke about this afternoon, it is okay to slow down, and just go at your pace. It's actually okay not to be okay, really. We shouldn't have to live by other people's standards other than our own. And of course, if you do connect and find a really good friend, really great friends are like rare jewels, aren't they? They're difficult to find in the first place, and then impossible to replace if you ever do lose them. So I think now is that time for connection. And a little quote I like there: "Your health is your wealth." And I've got to be honest, when I was a teenager, probably just before 20, I thought I was going to live forever. I thought I was going to retain the same level of fitness and all the rest of it, stamina, resilience, if you like. And it's only as you get older you realise some parts of your body are a little bit like a 30-year-old car, aren't they? Unless you either replace them or look after them or do something with them, they start to let you down a little bit. So another good reason to take care of your body. It's probably the best and the most complex and the most fascinating instrument you'll ever have in your life. So we take our cars to the garage at least once a year for an MOT, maybe twice if it needs a service. What do we do for ourselves, really? We spend more time, well, maybe not this year, but we spend more time planning our annual vacation than we do the rest of our lives. It's all this instant gratification stuff. We look after things apart from ourselves, and sometimes it helps just to sit down, reflect, and say, what's in it for me? What's good for me? But I just want to come finally now on to S. So before I reveal what S is, would anybody like to hazard a guess what it might be? If I was to say it's the most simplest thing you could do out of everything, well, apart maybe from breathing, because you need that to stay alive.
Sleep.
Sleep's very important. Keith's gone on mute. Is that because he knows the answer? I think he's read the exam paper. But and I can also say we've done a lot of it this afternoon.
Speak.
Smile.
Sorry, Graham.
Share.
Do you know, these are all great answers. They're really great answers. Sharing's really important. Speaking's great, really good thing to do. Sleep, but actually, it stands for smile. Okay. Now, interestingly, and I don't know whether you know this or not, but sometimes, and I won't do it because hopefully you'll all do it as well. But sometimes when you're in the company of somebody that yawns, and as much as you resist it, you end up yawning yourself, okay? I think there's something like a 98% chance that you're going to yawn if somebody else does. Well, the fact is, it's also true with a smile. A smile is a mirror, essentially, So when we're smiling at one another, it's very difficult not to smile back. And the really interesting thing is about a smile is that, and it's absolutely true if you want to go and Google this, because that's where I got it from, but when you're happy inside, you naturally smile. Okay, and if you just smile without necessarily feeling happy inside, it has a physiological impact to your body to make you feel happy. So it releases all these happy chemicals as well. I don't know if you knew this or it made sense, but I've just been more conscious of it over recent times. So, for example, when I watch comedians on TV or comedy sketch shows or something where genuinely want something to smile at, and just sit and think my space, a bit like Sue when you're away with your painting and decorating, it takes you to that different place. So smiling is really important. But there's one thing that's even better than smiling for your mood and your health? And it's related to smiling, but any ideas what that might be? Okay.
No.
I'm going to be quite brave now. I'm going to be quite brave and do something that I'm not particularly great at. So I went to the doctors recently, and it was nothing serious. It was before COVID, so I could go and see him. And I said to the doc, I said, I can't stop singing the green, green grass of home. And the doctor was rocking in his chair a bit, and he looked at me and he paused and said, that sounds very much to me like Tom Jones syndrome. And I said, Tom Jones syndrome? I said, is that common? And he just said, it's not unusual. So hopefully that would have made you laugh. I know you're fighting it, Graham. I can
Because
see
it's so bad.
it was bad, but actually laughter is better than smiling. And I'll tell you why that is. And again, it's physiological. So we all know in our mind or in our head, we've got this thing called the amygdala, which is our sort of survival instincts tool. Okay, it's fight or flight. It doesn't know the difference, so it primes your body with cortisol for stress, adrenaline for action. Okay, but you might want to try this at some point. When you're laughing, okay, you completely disable your amygdala, right? And so you can't be frightened when you're laughing. Apparently that's true from the world that is Google as well. So try that one out. But apologies for the joke. You can sort of substitute that one with something that might work a little bit better. But
There's on that point, I can attest. First, I've had a couple of situations which we don't know each other well enough for me to disclose just at the minute. But there is a great scene in Breaking Bad. If anyone's watched that show before, by far the best TV show made. Full stop. But I can't remember what series it is. But Walter, the central character, is looking for his money underneath his house. The police are turning up, the cartels are turning up. He's just the absurdities of life are going on. He looks really panicked, and all of a sudden he just descends into this laughter, the whole absurdity of what's going on. Bearing in mind, only a few months ago he was a mild-mannered chemistry teacher in a high school. If you're over the age of 18, you're going to have had at least one of those moments, I'm sure, and I've had several. But laughter somehow makes everything go away, even imminent threat. Just doesn't matter.
Well, my advice is, and John's well away with this at the moment, but my advice is just try it and see what happens and see how you feel. I spoke earlier about, if you can immerse yourself into a film, you're taken away into your own space for a period of time where you don't think about stuff. Combine that with laughter, it seems to be a really great cocktail to sort of take you. I don't know why you need recreational drugs these days, because there's natural things that we can do to put ourselves in a great place. And of course, none of this is new. I mean, it's been around for as long as we've been humans, of course. And Charles Dickens came up with this quote, and it's contagious in a really positive way. So I started talking about yawning, for example, which is contagious, and clearly it's not deadly or anything, but laughter is the same as well. Now, I've seen over the course of the afternoon, when we've been sharing a few jokes and anecdotes and metaphors, one screen lights up and all the other screens light up. So it is really infectious in a good way. So just be mindful of that, because I think, it is one of the more simple things that we can actually do. So, we've all got loads of comedy shows on Netflix or Amazon Prime or wherever it is. There's so much of it. But don't discount the fact there are things we can do that that are built within us.
Still on me webinar. Yeah, well, it won't be long. 10 minutes, I reckon. No, I don't think it's working.
Well, Graham doesn't know about the 3-hour exam, does he? Okay. So we are coming to the end anyway, and so that completes what Rainbows is. But what I'd like to do is just just what I hope from what we've been through and shared this afternoon is that, you know, we've talked about adaptability. Graham, you came up with that really great example of what you're doing for your business now, being more out there doing the videos, doing something different to what you were doing before. We spent a lot of time talking around positive mindset and how we can get ourselves into that space, controlling the controllables and letting go of stuff that we can't control. We've talked about how maybe being a little bit more healthy and a bit more out there can make us recover faster, eat the right things, drink water, get the right amount of sleep. We've also talked about the power of connection as well. Johnny talked about your colleagues overseas, and of course we've got David over in Nairobi as well. You know, we are a human species, we are a social species. We're not designed to be physically distant, I don't think. And actually I saw a stat once that said loneliness is almost the equivalent of smoking 20 cigarettes a day. And the only benefit of that is it's a bit cheaper, but the impact to your life is the same, you know. And I got that from the Action for Happiness website. If you want a reference on that, Keith, there's a lot of great stuff on there about how to remain positive. But loneliness is, you know, people who are lonely tend to have shorter lifespans than people in a, you know, relationship.
Unfortunately, it's a modern day killer. We're finding that out in with the elderly and care homes and divorce rates, and not to end on that, but all the rest of it. But loneliness is a recognised comorbidity over and above whatever else we've got going on. Anyway, let's not end on that. But
no. But I just wanted to finish with a quote from a guy called Tony Robbins. And for those of you that don't know him, he's quite big on the coaching scene in the US. He's done presidents and sports stars and stuff. And he came out with this quote, which I quite like, about the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. And it really goes back to that social connection, being more relational to one another. And I'll try and live by that mantra as we go forward. And the final thing really was, you know, and we've covered a lot of this already through the conversations we've had, because it's been a nice, neat group to have a bit of conversational interaction. You know, we've talked about certain things that we're going to stop doing and start doing, what we're going to continue doing, which was good from before, or maybe just things that we'll do just slightly differently. And I think we've shared quite a few examples this afternoon of all of that. What have I got next? Oh, I've got, thanks. I've got a couple more slides. If you just give me one or 2 minutes. So the one thing you will all receive at the end of this, I think, Keith, you've got the PDF brochure I sent across to you, which you can send out to everyone. And John, if you kindly can send that across to David, I'd appreciate that. It's just a short booklet, and it just contains all the points we've spoken about here. Might be good for reference for you. Take what you can from it, use what you want, and clearly what doesn't work. But what I would say is just try one thing, and if that works, just try something else. Don't try it all at once. It might be a little overwhelming. And just to say that as part of what I do in a coaching business, I think I've done it for a couple of you on the call already, but if you know anyone that particularly in the project management environments, needs some help either around team dynamics, presentational speaking, or methodologies, that's where my specialist niche is. And a couple of events I've got coming up in the next couple of weeks. On the 17th of November, I'm a member of the Project Management Institute, so I'm doing some coaching competencies for project professionals. That's a free webinar that you can join if you can connect to that link. And then on the 19th of November, I did mention before, I know some of you have done it already, but I'm licensed in using a personality profiling tool called DISC. And so I'm doing another webinar with a colleague on the 19th of November. And if it's of any interest to anyone, I'm also at the moment working on a series, a bit like your series, Keith, around developing a module of sales lessons, as it were. I'm doing something similar around developing your own signature style for speaking and presenting. Okay, I've got a book here called, where is it? Oops. It's called And Death Came Third. So people would die before they would do public speaking, and the one that comes second is networking. So really vital, important human skills. And when you think about it, we are social creatures. It's the art of communication. But very often, when you put us in a group of people, we just sort of freeze up, and it gets back to that fear again. So at the moment, I'm putting a few lessons together around structure and vocal variety and all those things you can see on the screen. If you've got any interest in any of those, just keep in touch with me and I'll let you know when that's going to be available. And I think that is it. So I want to just thank everybody for their time this afternoon. I've thoroughly enjoyed it from sharing this and also learning your stories and your journey and your tips and tricks as well. I just like to know how you found the event this afternoon. Maybe start with yourself, John.
I really enjoyed it, thank you. And I like the bit about if you crash, you die. Nice joke, but it's so true. That's the way they are.
Yeah.
So you got one massive takeaway. Yeah. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you. No, it was excellent.
You're welcome. And clearly, when you have a chance to converse with David afterwards, I'd like to hear his feedback too. How about yourself, Graham?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think I've learned anything that I didn't already know, but it's the usual thing. You know this stuff, and it gets filed away in the back of your brain somewhere. Yeah. And it's just useful to talk about it again because it kind of raises it from where it's stored in your brain to the kind of forefront of your thought process.
Great, thank you for that. How about you, Sue?
Totally agree with Graham. To be honest with you, it just reminds you what you already know in the main, and maybe inspires you to do it rather than think about it or just leave it packed away somewhere. Action is the key.
Absolutely, yeah. Stephen Covey, I'm reading it off my wall now. Habit number 1, be proactive, do something. I think is vitally important. Yeah. How about yourself, Keith?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I have learned some new things now, whether it's relearning or whether it's actually new, I have learned some things. But so the notion of breathing, just taking time out, just even if it's 2 minutes, just to disengage and then re-engage, it's just really restorative stuff. So we'll be putting lots of stuff into action as a result of these things, notwithstanding, how we're all living life at the moment. But I found that really cathartic. Thank you very much.
Right. Excellent. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned at the start, I put this together back in March thinking it was really relevant, but to be honest, I think it's relevant anytime, isn't it? Like I said, over the period I've done this, I've realized that you need these things even when things are going well, because you need to maintain and improve on where you are. And I think you said it at the start, Keith, it's a challenge, of staying or progressing from when things are good as well, as well as when they're quite negative. But I just want to thank everyone for their time this afternoon, and look forward in the future to maybe doing something similar or maybe on a different subject. But just want to say thanks, and yeah, I guess I don't know if you've got any closing comments, Keith, that you want to share.
Well, just to say thank you very much, Nigel, for putting this on. This is very clearly Nigel's content, and without putting you on the spot, Nigel, I have to say it's been a real joy to watch you go from being outside of your comfort zone, which I think you would agree that you are, from the person that I kind of knew 12 months ago, and going through this process.
Thank you.
It's a journey we've been through together, if you like. At least virtually together, and so it's fantastic to see you putting webinars in process and building your own program. So that's really positive, and I appreciate John, David in Nairobi, lucky chap, and Graham and Sue coming on the call as well. I really hope that you've derived some value as that on that as well. If I may, I'll follow up with the YouTube recording just in case you want to get some tidbits back, but feel free to connect with each other. I hope put that out on LinkedIn. Let's stay in touch. If there are any subjects you want to discuss, very happy to talk about hosting something for you too. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your attention, everyone. Have a great rest of day or evening, and we'll get to see you really, really soon.
Okay,
I think
care.
it's been quite
Thanks
nice.
very
everybody
much, guys.
Being able to chat as well.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, thanks for that, Sue.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
great to see
Take
you
care,
again.
everyone.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.